Hello, I'm Alexis from BSC Designer. Welcome to the next episode of Strategy Field Notes. In this episode, I want to share with you one of the interesting cases we have worked on recently. As always, I will use a sample Excel spreadsheet to illustrate the ideas that we worked with, and then we switch to the BSC Designer platform and we'll discuss what was our approach to solving these challenges. What happened in this case? In this case, the client had a number of initiatives. Of course, most of them were AI-related initiatives. And there was a kind of portfolio of these initiatives that the company was tracking. The nuances of performance measurement in this case included that there were certain fixed metrics, fixed KPIs, and also KPIs that were used depending on the stage of the initiative. So, for example, the fixed or persistent KPIs for each initiative were some metrics related to budget, its usage, the estimated value creation, certain estimation of the quality of evidence, as well as risk estimation. So those were persistent KPIs. And there were also some metrics that client wanted to track depending on the stage of this initiative. So the stages were evaluation, pilot, implementation, and operation. And depending on the stage, the client had to track different set of metrics with their own weights and their own targets. That was a particular challenge to automate this in a spreadsheet, because when you have like one or two initiatives, you can just copy and paste. But when you have more, you start losing a high-level view of these initiatives. And for this example, we just added these sample initiatives, these 4 initiatives, each with its fixed set of metrics like budget metrics, and also the part related to the stage relevant KPIs that's supposed to change depending on the stage where this initiative is. We haven't seen the finished spreadsheet. So the client shown us some prototype, and eventually on this stage, when there was a need to implement this logic that certain set of KPIs is activated only for specific period, only for specific stage of the initiative. We have not seen how this logic was implemented in Excel spreadsheets. So, but the idea was clear, and we tried to migrate it into the software. This time I will not do it in real time, because it was quite complex. It was quite complex to do it. And I will show you the final sample of how this was moved from spreadsheet to here. And I will comment some important architectural choices along the way. First of all, the question that I asked the client: do you think that the metrics that you define for each stage, they will remain the same over time? I mean, if you develop your approach, if you start, and if you increase this maturity level of how you track the AI investment initiatives in your case, do you expect this set of metrics to be adjusted? Do you expect your target to be adjusted? Do you expect the weights to be adjusted? And do you expect more metrics to be added into each stage of the evaluation? And the client responded, yes, it's a possible scenario, and it's one of the reasons we cannot hardcore it in the spreadsheet. And this dictated a certain architectural solution to use in BSC Designer. This solution is based on items that are synced automatically. To illustrate this, you have here this initiative template. Here are the fixed metrics that client want to have. They are set up according to certain rules. We'll talk about this. And here there are also stage specific metrics. So we created this structure once, and the first architectural decision is that instead of just copy and pasting them, we will create a synced copy. So you see here, it's synced from template. This one is synced from template. It's easy to create this copy. To do this, I just copy, and when I do paste, instead of just select and paste item, which will create a normal copy, I select this option, paste and keep sync. What's the benefit of this approach? The benefit is if I, for example, let me open here, I have total budget used, for example. If I, for example, change this budget used by the team, let's change it this way. This change is automatically translated to all of these replicas. And let's get back to original. And if I want to change something else, like adjust the, for example, for the stage indicators, if I want to adjust the weight, this change will be translated to all the replicas. So now I have 4 replicas. That's an architectural decision we implemented to make sure that in a case of the original architecture, in a case of original set of metrics changes, the change is automatically replicated to all these items. So that's the first idea. Another idea was to start with automating these persistent KPIs. We have a different video where we talk about managing the budget, tracking the deviation, tracking the variance. So I will not talk about this a lot. What's interesting is that one of the metrics was evidence level, which shows the quality of evidence provided. And I have it here. And it was configured using a special measurement unit. I had to create it, evidence type, which is explained here. So depending on what kind of evidence is provided, the different quantitative estimation will be provided to the platform. So if the evidence is just an estimate, someone say, okay, we think that this initiative will generate this kind of value, you have its very low final quantitative estimation. If it's pilot, it has higher estimation, and once it's validated, it's even higher, and when it's realized, it's 100% estimation, because we actually see we can use it and it's already creating impact for the business. So that's one of the things we implemented, and for this specific metric, I can track, you see this first column, estimate the current value. I can track how it was changing over time. So for the first months it was estimate, then it changed to pilots, then it changed to validated. Yeah, so this I always can track back and see what happens to this. Yeah, I can see it here via calendar, or I can see it via the interface. The same happens for the risk. In the platform, we have here risk indicators that you can use that create an indicator with probability, impact, risk mitigation plan, and you can track all these indicators over time. In this case, there was no need to implement it in that complex way. So instead of this, again, a very simple scale for risk was used just to demonstrate how the risk changes over time. And again, in the beginning, the risk was high, and then with the implementation progress, we decreased the risk. Okay, this is sample data anyway. What about budget? We talked about this in different videos, so very briefly, the total budget was defined as 50,000 in this case. The budget used was tracked monthly. For some months we have budget used, for others no. For in this column Y2C or year to date, depending on what date I select on the calendar, I see what the total budget is, which is 50, and I see what the used budget is, which is 35. That's the sum of all this. And that's another metric to be tracked, like approved value. The same principle for tracking it. The forecast, the evidence value, we talked about it. And this is budget utilization that is calculated automatically using this formula. I can show you here. And value forecast variance, another formula. So that's it for this persistent KPIs, the KPIs that we track over time. If you're no BSC Designer platform, you might notice that they have this icon here, and you know what it stands for. It stands for raw data indicator. It means that this indicator, I can disable it so you can see what happens if I disable it. If I disable it, the software tries to calculate the progress using the current value, using the target. It tries to calculate the progress, the degree of achievement of this metric or objective according to the target. In this case, this is not the business context we have. It's not improvement indicator, it's not improvement objective, it's just a metric with data. So that's why we activated this raw data indicator, so that it has only current value, target if I need, and this year to selected value calculated. So that's the fixed part. Now, the interesting part is how these stage-specific metrics were implemented. In the template, we defined 4 stages, and for each stage there was its own set of metrics. And here, the logic to implement was that during the pilot, this is measured only by the stage 1 metrics, only by these evaluation metrics. And then when we moved from evaluation to pilot, we have stage 2 metrics. And then when we moved to, in May, we moved to implementation. There are no stage 1 and stage 2 metrics, they're no longer relevant, but there is a different set of metrics, stage 3 metrics. So how to implement this logic if you're using BSC Designer? Again, that was a problem in Spreadsheet, and one of the reasons why clients decided to look for a specialized platform. It's very simple. To do this, I select this stage 1 item, and I put here in the timeline my timeline for this stage 1. What the software does? The software does 2 things. First of all, it looks at this timeline, and then it looks at the underlying data. In this case, I have only data for January, and I'll have only data for January. So by doing these 2 things, by limiting data to be for January only, and by specifying this timeline, we tell to the software that this set of metrics is relevant for January only. So if I select February in calendar, I don't see this set of metrics. And what's more important, it is not used for the calculation of this current stage performance. So for current stage performance, in this case, the stage 2 metrics are activated. Again, I can go here and see what it's for this period, and the data will be there. I can actually combine different metrics, so I can have at the same time stage 2 and stage 3 metrics if needed. The same happens when we go to stage 3. The metric set for stage 3 is activated, meaning that stage 3 is calculating our current stage performance. So stage 3 is providing performance for current stage. And current stage performance is one of the metrics that we see here. Might sound complicated, but the initial model is complicated as well. Another thing that customer asks us to have is that, I have my initiatives and I have their performance. I can just switch to a different view to see how they're performing, but sometimes I need to see all my details. I need to see what's the current stage of this of this specific initiative. And what is current performance? The current performance is calculated automatically. We decide how it's calculated. Now, only these stage metrics are used to calculate the overall performance. You see this 30% are translated directly here. Because of these metrics, they are configured as if they are not generating any progress, any performance. Yeah. So, if, for example, my business case imply that budget utilization is one of the metrics that generate the performance as well, I would deactivate it, raw data, and it would impact the overall performance. But that was not the case. That's what was implemented. And another thing that client want to see is that what current stage of this initiative is. You can deduce it by looking at the current stage here, but it's more relevant for calculations. To have a specific text saying that this initiative has this pilot stage, we had to use a custom fields. I see here the stage column and the pilot setting for it. I have it stage column here, and its current state is pilot. Again, we have a different video explaining how to do this customization. I will just explain it briefly. Here we have this AI initiative as a role for this item. And in settings, in account setting, I have created a new custom field which is activated when this role is applied. So if this role is AI initiative, I have this field to fill in the current stage. So for example, let me check if I activate this AI initiative role here, and I see I have this field for the stage. But for example, this item, its role is not AI initiative, so I don't have this field here. So that's how you create this additional state or stage field, and you add it, and you have it also in reports and everywhere else. Let's see some visuals. By assigning different dates to this stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, we added to the platform the information about how these stages are implemented on a timeline. And I can visualize this information. I have created this Gantt chart that shows me how this stage can be visualized depending on the start date and the end date. I also have these budget metrics, and I can visualize them here. Depending on what date I select, their value will be changed. So I see that evidence level, for example, changed from pilot to finally validated, and the risk level decreased. I also can visualize some of the metrics I have and add charts and diagrams for any of these. And we can also create a different dashboard, a different chart showing, it's important to show what kind of chart it is, a series chart. So this diagram, this chart shows how each of the initiatives in portfolio are performing. We see in this case, it's all about budget, total budget, budget used, approved value, current value forecast. All this is visualized, and again, if I change the date, I see how it is changing in the case of my initiative. So I decide what kind of information I want to visualize. And finally, the strategy map that was created automatically, probably not set visually impacting in this case, because it's not strategy scorecard, it's more like performance measurement scorecard. But it gives us certain information about how we're doing. And again, by changing the date, I can see how this changes over time. So that's what we did for this case. Again, persistent KPIs that change depending on the current stage of the initiative, the calculations of budget, the calculation of overall performance depending on what stage this initiative is now, and the architectural decision to use this synced set of metrics, so that if we change our mind and if we want to modify something, we can, for example, update the weight of this, so that this change is translated to all of the replicas that were discussed, that were created using this template. We have this page with all the calculations that we can change depending on what kind of story we want to have now. We have dashboards that visualizes certain parts of the performance, and of course we have strategy map that shows a big picture. This view, it's more for operational control, and if we need it for executives, we have reports that we can create and just showcase this relevant data there. That's all I wanted to explain you about this case. Hope you like it. Feel free to comment, feel free to contact our team with your own case, and thank you for your attention.